So I've always explained why we visit Conservative Home. Conservative Home, its readership it knows its readership, and its readership is the Conservative Party membership. That's why it exists. That's its biggest readership. That's why it has been able to very accurately predict for quite a while who is going to win the leadership contests, and more importantly, the authors who write for Conservative Home write specifically because they know they are addressing the Conservative membership, not a national publication, things like that. This is why I said we see things said and done in Conservative Home that you would never see anywhere else. And today we're going to have a look at Will's. Will's done a piece. I haven't read it yet, so you're going to get my first honest reaction. But I couldn't resist because I instantly saw what the title was. And his title is "The Greatest Benefit of Brexit was to show the fault was not in Brussels, but in ourselves." And that is kind of a telling admission coming from Will. That is a very, very telling admission coming from Will, because we don't know Will's backstory. He became politically active during the referendum, and it was that when he realized that he was a true conservative, and that's when he knew that he had to rally the young people to, to leave the European Union. And he was a big part of the Leave youth movement at that point, writing. You can still find a lot of the stuff he wrote back then about why young people should vote to leave and so on. But since then, as we have seen many times over the years, Will is not only going through a bit of a Tory pre-midlife crisis, he's going through a pre-Brexit midlife crisis on this, because I think he is really realizing what he voted for. The benefits that he promised and wrote about have not been forthcoming, that they aren't going to materialize, and that these are, a lot of problems that he himself once advocated for, and is eventually, I think, going to get turned around and said, well, hold on, Will, you advocated for all this. Why isn't all this stuff happening? And now you've got him writing this piece here, which is like, well, actually, all this stuff, I wrote blaming Brussels about actually was our fault. It was the UK government's fault. And you're like, no. That's what we were saying for so long. All these problems the Brexiteers used to complain about were not a fault of Brussels, that it was the fault of the Conservative government. Most notably, it was Conservative austerity and their policies that led to such bad outcomes in society. And will he blame the Conservative government during that period? We'll see. We'll see. But again, it's Will. So I'm not expecting him to be maybe too honest here. Maybe there might be some stuff where he's a bit, just a bit, bit honest, but he's not going to be too honest. And then, of course, I think it's worth going through the comments, because whenever it's an article about Brexit, the comments on Conservative Home are always a good one to read. So before we do get on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the Buy Me a Coffee link, where you can, buy me coffee. There's the Pony Club down below as well, the YouTube subscription as well, and of course the YouTube thank you button as well. So let's crack on then into this. Coming on, of course, from Conservative Home, by, of course, our favorite T-boy of all time, good old Will, good old cheeky Will. Anyway, let's get on to this. So, the greatest benefit of Brexit was to show the fault was not in Brussels, but in ourselves. So he starts off with a quote from Otto von Bismarck. Not through the speeches and majority decisions will the great questions of the day be decided. That was the great mistake of 1848 and 1849, but by iron and blood. Bear in mind, bit of an odd quote there, because, Otto von Bismarck basically saying, hey, look, if we are going to unite Germany, we are going to have to fight for it. And particularly Otto von Bismarck's version of Germany fighting for it as well, because pretty much like standard policy for Russia, Austria, France had been that there can be no dominating Central European state. Like, that was their pretty much standard foreign policy. And Prussia had come to be a bit of a power player at that point, especially in the post-Napoleonic War times. So it had become a bit of a major power. There had been big pushes in German nationalism to create a German sort of state. And of course, France didn't want that. Austria didn't want that. Neither did Russia. However, Otto von Bismarck, massively clever, influential. But again, we're already being distracted already by this Otto von Bismarck quote. But, massively sort of political minded, real political genius, really, of his time. One of probably the big, statesmen of that period. Very, very interesting character as well. It's well worth going to read up about him, but kind of weird that you'd use such a quote on there about Otto von Bismarck there, Will, and then contrast it with a quote from Boris Johnson saying that voting Tory will cause your wife to have bigger breasts and increase your chances of owning a BMW M3. Kind of a bit of I don't really know there, taking one of the most famous quotes of Otto of Otto von Bismarck, and then contrasting it with Boris Johnson. Like, why are you trying to contrast those quotes there, Will? Maybe we'll find out. But weird way to start. Weird way to open, Will. Weird way to open. Anyway. Today, he says, Keir Starmer is off to Brussels. 5 years after we formally left the European Union, the Prime Minister hopes to negotiate a reset in our relations with the bloc. Reports do differ on how enthusiastic Ursula von der Leyen, couldn't say her name then, and etc. are about all these ambitions, especially, of course, with the distractions now provided by Donald Trump, Ukraine, and domestic turmoil. But Starmer will be hoping for at least tangible results. Alongside appeasing his backbench MPs, nursing a tenderness now for membership, Starmer hopes agreements on trade, security, and crime will, of course, help out on the domestic front. Again, all these things, Boris Johnson could have had, but he decided not to pursue them at all. But there you go. Anyway, whenever the Prime Minister, of course, comes back with, we can expect, of course, the usual cry to go out from not only ourselves and, of course, Reform UK of a sellout, betraying Brexit, overturning the referendum, and so on. Tim Shipman resuggests that Europeans, of course, plan on driving a hard bargain over access to British fish stocks. And, of course, for EU trawlers are now very keen to reintroduce to some form of freedom of movement for the under 30s. Again, both those things, sure. Because as we saw back in the day, Boris Johnson was not going to go to the wall for the British fish industry. It is an industry that is worth less than 1% of our GDP, allowing Europeans, maybe having some sort of, associate membership of the European fishing communities or something like that, following along with those rules and regulations, which many of we actually still have. Maybe not a bad idea. Probably be very good for a lot of fishermen as well. And again, freedom of movement for under 30s, great. Good for us, good for Europeans. That's a win-win, quite frankly, for us both. But of course, now it will cross the long-standing Brexiteer cause. Will be celebrities saying that the large concessions on both would now create considerable noise across the right-wing entertainment industry. GB News is, of course, squandered. The Daily Mail and the Express are pretty prepared. The usual suspects will, of course, be wielded out to parrot all the usual lines, revealing now their righteous impotence as Starmer and von der Leyen smile now for the cameras. Oh boy. Well, I'll tell you what, Will is right on that. We will see so much Brexiteer stuff on this. And here's the thing, if Starmer does get depending what he comes back with, the question will be put back to all those Tories saying, well, hold on, what Starmer's got is actually really good for the economy, does this, this, and this. Why didn't you get that? What? Why didn't you choose not to pursue? I don't think they realize how bad, they are going to look at that, to be honest. So, will voters notice? He continues. Recent polls have found that only 30% of those surveyed through the UK saying that it was right to leave the European Union, against the 55% who said it was wrong to. This very same figure with to rejoin, with 65% want a close relationship of some kind. A separate poll showed 54% backing for Starmer's bid and 57% now support for an under 30 migration deal. Gee, why is all this public support swinging for us when, of course, remember Douglas Carswell, very terrible, very poor time quote for him that a lot of people have been tracking out because of those polls, that, oh, soon you won't be able to find someone who claimed to vote for Remain. Meanwhile, of course, this is the reason why they did this, was because you go back to the Iraq War, you look at the polling, according to the polling, you should be find anyone able to say, they would support the Iraq War. If you went out there now, you could find no one that would say they support the Iraq War, of course, given the polling at that same time. Looks like Brexit is going the exact same way. In short, he continues, one can suggest that this very punitive reset is one of Starmer's most popular policies. Amongst now the bleak and uncompetitive field, yet it is a triumph for the Leavers that a Prime Minister who had half a decade ago strained to overturn the referendum result is now fit enough of a Brexiteer backlash to avoid anything more than tinkering with now the existing relationship. All power to Morgan McCummings. I think, given, of course, as we've said many times before, Starmer is being very slow. He is right in some ways to worry about a Brexiteer backlash. However, you look at the polls, look at the possibility of what Starmer might come back with. There may be other talks that go on as well. Is it actually the other way around, that actually it's the Brexiteers who are more scared of a pro-EU backlash than it is the other way around? I don't know. Maybe it would, maybe it might be. But it is all going to show you that, oh, look, actually our ties with the EU were really important. They were really good for us. Why did we get rid of them? And again, it all goes back to asking that question, what was the point of Brexit? The biggest question Brexiteers are terrified to ask. Even Will, I daren't even think, honestly, ask himself that question. Anyway, it continues. In his, of course, frantic attempts to now try and salvage this rudderless and self-destructive government, they have a very clear directive. They've done a lot of good stuff. The economy is not doing too bad, despite, of course, the right-wing pearl clutching, of course, at the stuff that they've done. He seems, of course, keener now on preserving the spirit of 2016 than most of its leading proponents. Thinking back to, of course, those front and center of those over a decade ago, many of now Brexit's leading proponents are now either out of Parliament, discredited, or irrelevant, or they've returned to their valleys, their farms, and their blogs. Well, they certainly did return to their blogs for you, Will. But yeah, Will's got a good point right there. As we said, this Parliament, we're probably going to have more and better discussions about the cost of Brexit, what it has done to the UK, because all those people are either out of Parliament, they've been discredited, or just completely irrelevant now. That is a good thing. I always said in the lead up to this election, that would be a good thing. Only Nigel Farage remains as a Brexiteer with a realistic chance of holding power, and he wasn't even a member of Vote Leave. Even, of course, if he is smiled upon more than before, his consciousness that he is now the most plausible avatar for an Anglo project of 2029, he remains a very flawed avatar for the Eurosceptic hopes. An ECHR campaign led by him and Suella Braverman would be fun. I do agree with you on that, Will. That would be fun. If they really do want to campaign on leaving the European Court of Human Rights. They are really still campaigning for that hard. They still want that. And I think there needs to be a lot more attention brought to just how important us being a part of that really is. Anyway, the internal debates over, quote, how well Brexit is going or how worth it leaving will continue. The two sides will, of course, choose their own terms of debate. They will talk past each other, deploy their own stats. Pandemics and invasions will be conveniently forgotten by Remainers. Invasion immigration statistics, lamented by those leavers, and of course, self-aware enough to know that we had one job and we ballsed it up. Here's the thing. I am a Remainer. I've never left that out. We have never left that out. We have never left out the impacts of the pandemic and the Ukraine invasion on our economy and the impacts that it had on it. But it's even more important now because you can look at, well, okay, how did other EU countries handle that as well? Because they had to deal with the effects of the pandemic. They had to deal with the exact same economic effect of, the Ukraine invasion. How well did they really do against, compared to our economy? Oh, it looks like they did actually quite well compared to us. So Will bringing that up isn't good. And here's the thing: as someone who is like a Remainer and wants to sort of rejoin the EU, what Will's just laid out there, we should always bring up the economic impacts of that, because guess what? It just shows you that leaving was bad because other European economies had to deal with it as well. They were dealt with it a lot better than we did. A lot better. So, just to show you, people like me, these aren't conveniently forgotten. If anything, they are brilliant data points to bring up just to show you how well the European economies dealt with that because they were part of the single market, because they were part of the customs union, compared to us who had left it at that time. Just, worth bringing up there, Will. Anyway, bring out, of course, then the counterfactuals. What if David Cameron had stayed on and, of course, negotiated a softer Brexit that left us in the single market, as Ian Macclesfield highlights? What would that, of course, have been easier to get past Parliament? And, of course, prevented any Tory thinking about welfare reform ending on the 24th of June, 2016. If we'd retained freedom of movement, would migration levels have remained lower? Well, here's the thing. Remember, Leave always said, again, to quote Daniel Hannan, the brain of Brexit, that a vote for Leave was not about leaving the single market and customs union. Only a fool would leave the single market and customs union. Anyway, Will's playing what if now. And on we go, he continues. What if Boris Johnson hadn't sodded off to play cricket? What if enough Labour MPs had broken to back Theresa May's deal? What if we hadn't had COVID or Russia's invasion? But there is no point debating the alternative timelines. We are now out of the European Union, and a future government might take us back in. Indeed, right-wingers might even find that the coming Brussels is a far more attractive company. I like that he goes, a future government might take us back in. Then if you're admitting that already, well, that might be the case, what was the point of Brexit? Always come to that most feared point, because a Brexiteer like Will not actually sit down and really answer that question. They will always dance around it. They will always point to something like, this was why it was so worth it. But again, he's not really addressing the question. So Starmer's reset, of course, represents the reality of our independence. Permanent negotiation is not wrong there, to be honest. The constant and, of course, never ending process of debate, argument, reconciliation, and bartering now as a ministerial churn, government evolution, and, of course, the relentless process of events forces now to drift further apart or closer together. Freedom is messy, diplomacy is interminable, but regret is inevitable. Really, and noticing that regret is now inevitable because if we are having to spend so much on this constant drift, so much on diplomacy, why was Brexit worth it? Well, if we're having to do all this constantly. So he continues, we have had so far our renewed independence in ways that Brexiteers of all stripes find now deeply disappointing. The vaccine rollout wouldn't have happened as it did without a leave vote. That's a lie, Will, and you know that. That's a lie, and you know that, Will. Anyway, but any goodwill that that has endangered as long since been crucified on the altar, of course, of the Boris wave. Pointing out that the Germans have it worse doesn't make a single British voter better off. Well, here's the thing: you say the vaccine rollout wouldn't have happened as it did. Um, Other countries might have been later in getting the vaccine, but when they actually got the vaccine, they actually rolled it out faster than we did. And of course, Denmark, if again, I'm sure people will correct me if I'm wrong, but I also believe they also started getting the vaccine very shortly after us and rolled it out even quicker than us. Anyway, he continues. Yes, of course, we have achieved that great original ambition. We are now the masters of our own fate. The governments no longer have to have the clutch of blaming Brussels. We are free, whereas the political circumstances allow, to either diverge or to be held accountable for it. We are out of the reach now of an ever closer union. But Brexit has also shown us that the fault was not in Europe, but in ourselves. Then that undermines probably one of the biggest arguments of Brexit, that all problems originate from Brussels, not us. Kind of undermined one of the main arguments that the Brexiteers had for Brexit. We have now been forced to think much harder about the domestic foundations of our stagnation. Those were always there with us or not. We are the victims of our own politicians. A project now of national renewal required a Bismarck, a Lee Kuan Yew, or even a Neben Buke, I think that's how you say it, not Alexander Boris de Piffle Johnson. Ooh, I like how he's using de Piffle Johnson there. Will's really turned against Johnson on that one, considering he used to sing Boris Johnson's praises not that too long ago. It's hard not to think through Shipman's 4 volumes and wonder if that junta of a Belgian ticket inspectors were actually so bad. But just as Trump is now teaching us that sovereign government can just do things, so did Brexit prove that the clock can be put back and that the ascendancy can be beaten. As tragic as the last decade might have proved for our fifth in our political class, the fortunes of the Tory party and Shipman's summer holidays, the brave new right have now learnt valuable lessons. Oh, this is something we probably have to explain at some point as well. The brave new right. This is Will's new plan for like this new right wing renewal they've got. We'll probably have to go into it at some point, but it's kind of funny because they think they're doing all these like brand new things, but it is exactly the kind of stuff that right now the Tory party would hate. Right now, the Tory party would hate, and they ain't going to go in that direction. Will they maybe succeed one day? Well, probably so, given the fact of, they're probably just going to end up inheriting it because all those old voters that don't like them are going to sort of die off, and then they're going to be the inheritors of the Tory party. So, yeah. We'll see what happens on that. But anyway, all that, of course, that earlier energy of the generations of now sensitive young men put into the campaign against the euro has now been redirected. A much better picture of why we are so poor and our governance is now so underwhelming can now be produced now that there is illusion that, of course, freed from the Brussels yoke, broad the sunlit uplands awaited. If there is hope, it does lie in the anons, the yimbys, and the substacks. What about your own political party, Will? Because you are talking about these again, how Brexit kind of failed, and how maybe you're looking back at it. Actually, Brexit wasn't so bad, which is again what is coming across in the article quite a lot. What about your own party? You've blamed Boris Johnson. You haven't blamed, the people who were really pushing for Brexit. Remember, Will Atkinson used to have a regular podcast with Jacob Rees-Mogg before, of course, Rees-Mogg got a better deal and got, asked to be paid by GB News and then got fired from GB News. I wonder how if Will is reaching out again to have a talk with Rees-Mogg to try and restart the Mogcast. I somehow doubt we're going to see a revival of that mockcast. But he continues, politics was always awful before Brexit, and he's only become far more since. Why? It's because of Brexit. It was, of course, the last opportunity for us right-wingers really had to be hopeful about anything. And we spaffed it up the wall. But even if it hasn't started as we would have liked it, the other side got 45 odd years to now test their approach. Starmer or no Starmer, reset or no reset, Brexit needs time to teeth. And now we get the excuse that every Brexiteer trots out. Brexit just needs time to breathe. Just give it a couple more years, guys. Just give it a couple more years, and you'll see how good it is. We've had 5 years of it, not really been that successful. In another 5 years, Brexiteers will say exactly the same thing. Don't worry, guys. We've had a decade of Brexit, but don't worry. Give it another 5 years, and it'll be great. 15 years. Don't worry, guys. Another 5 years, and it'll be great. Remember, Jacob Rees-Mogg said we need 50 years to prove that Brexit was a good idea. Anyway, leaving has not been as disastrous as Remainers had feared. It has been as bad as we had feared on some of the stuff, not all of the stuff, of course. But there you go. Nor, of course, as beneficial as leavers had hoped. It is an unfinished revolution, overtaken by events. Any enthusiasm on the parts of all but a few trusted believers now has long since disappeared. British history reached its turning point and then failed the turn. Neither joining or leaving really mattered as much as we made out. Nothing does. But it ended now to the grand illusions that can be now the start of something greater. Knowing how bad things really are, we can be warying, but we can also be spurred to action. A hard rain still needs to fall. So, of course, really what Will is saying here is, guys, you don't understand. That's not real Brexit. Yeah, that's what our entire article is. He's basically falling back on the excuse of, guys, that's just not Brexit. Don't worry. Real Brexit is yet to come. You cannot keep on trotting out the same excuses, but that is where we are with a lot of these Brexiteers. That's all they've got left. We've either got, just needs a couple more years, guys. Don't worry. Give Brexit just a couple more years. It'll great. It'll all work out. Trust us. Or that wasn't real Brexit. Don't worry. All those Brexiteers, those Eurosceptics, they didn't deliver us, real Brexit. Real Brexit is yet to come. Trust us, guys. It's coming. It's on our way. It's on its way. This is exactly what we see all the time with communists who turn around and just go, "Oh, that wasn't real communism. Real communism is just that much better." They don't even realize that they're making the same argument as those communists that they always deride for making that argument. Just anyway, I do realize it's been a long video. We won't go into the comments, but trust me, the comments are quite funny, arguing, of course, about the pros and cons of Brexit. And as you can see, they're split. If you do go into these comments, they are very, very much split. Are very, 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 very much split. And remember, this is meant to be, a true conservative site, and it's interesting to see that there is so much disagreement between still Leave and Remain on this. And if anything, there's a couple of people that are saying that they do regret their votes and going in this direction, that Brexit was a bad idea for the Conservative Party and the way it went. So, yeah, interesting on that they are arguing that way. Who knows? Maybe a sign of things to come. Who knows? But as always, thank you very much. Of course, leave your own comments down below. Let me know what you think of Will's musings on this, because he's basically just written a very long-winded way to say, "Oh, don't worry, guys. That wasn't Brexit, but true Brexit. It's gonna be so much better." But of course, as always, like I say, leave your comments down below. Hit the like, hit the share button on your way out, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.